So the argument over what the national interests are that Russia should follow is very fierce.
But what is the biggest threat?
The biggest threat to Russia? Implosion. The biggest threat to Russia is that economic conditions deteriorate so badly and so, let's say, unequally around the country that you create large numbers, millions and millions of people with nothing to lose but revolt against the centre and revolt against prosperity. That's the biggest threat in this country.
Do they have any? So, if we conclude it, you see it developing in a negative way, or do you see it developing it in a positive way, on the long term? Again,
well,
does it lead to something, or is it just a finger up in the air and let's see where we go?
Well, let's say we're observers. You look through the lens of your camera at what's happening. I'm also an observer. But if you ask me if I were an actor, I would say nobody is putting their finger up in the air. No Russian, no serious Russian, has lost his sense of where his interest lies. What we have now is intense competition for property, for capital, for the resources to survive oneself and to survive as a region, a city, an institution, whatever. Everybody is fighting for survival. So everybody knows, or they think they know, what they need to do for that. In that process, the government plays a role, but not a dominant role. Parliament plays a role, but not a dominant one. Regional authorities play a role, but not a dominant one. There is no concentration of power that's decisive, and there's no consensus on how to solve conflicts between my claim to your property and your claim to mine. So I see this process going on for a long time. I think it's, so long as it's non-violent, I suppose that's hopeful. Until violence last year, I was more hopeful that Russia could evolve a new consensus, a new sense of national interest, a democratic sharing and balance of power. After the violence, I'm less hopeful. Violence produces revenge, economic...
Yeah, but if that is true, why I don't see any revenge developing. I don't see, and you should admit from a democratic or a Western point of view, some things have improved. You can't say that the former parliament was a democratic one, was leading to something, was developing something.
Well, I thought we agreed we're not going to talk about the history of the last parliament. So rather than take the question in that way...
You say that after, maybe it was just an event and no real turning. The violence was in itself was not that important.
I think it was very important. The president overrode the decision of the highest legal body of the land and then destroyed his opposition violently. Not to regard that as important is a mistake. Now, what it'll mean in the long term is another question. Why it happened in that time is another question again.